just when you think you picked your perfect 3 regions, you realise something that completely ruins it. So you swap, only to run into more problems. It's honestly fun and stressful in equal measures, and there isn't 3 perfect regions out there, but there are some regions that go together better than others, depending on what your strategy is. So starting out with a melee build, if this is what you're trying to go for, every league's the main combat relic that we can choose means it's a perfectly viable method to try to pick regions that give you the best gear for just one combat style. Then you just pick the relic that halves the speeds of attacks for that combat style. Now we're getting combat masteries this time, but they are permanent choices, so they're probably going to be similar to what we had previously. So what's the best regions for a very strong melee build? Well, obviously one of the raid regions for the site to start off with, but if you pick a raid region, that will also mean straight away you need a decent mage and range setup too to be able to do the raid. However, the Theatre of Blood is far more melee focused than the other raids, so for the melee build I personally would pick this region. It's not just the Scythe as well, it gives you the Rapier, the Avernic, Amulet of Blood Fury, Amulet of Rancor, all barrow sets and full Inquisitors, so if you get a boss that's not weak to slash, you're covered as well. You also have the Nightmare here, which you also predominantly need melee to defeat as well, and you kind of got to be a little bit careful of that as well when you're picking your regions, and don't just simply focus on just the gear that you get. The Barrows brothers here are mid-level bosses too, so you don't have to worry about the fact that most of them are weak to magic. They'll be extremely easy in leagues with all your buffs, even if you do kill them with melee. This region also has a few other good items too, like the Black Mask and the Salve Amulet. It also covers you for any boss that's weak to slash through the scythe. You have full Inquisitors for crush and the Rapier for anything that's weak to stab. You get the best 2 melee amulets in the game, plus the starter regions gives us the Infernal Cape and a region bracelet too. You could go down the Varlamore route after this. Bosses are very weak to melee, but you don't really get any upgrades to your gear here. So instead, I will probably go down the Asgarnia route. It gives Prims from Cerberus and the Dragon Defender to go with the Avernic. It also gives you Torva, and the bosses are primarily weak to melee again. It's only really Kriara that you can't kill with melee, since most of Ziliana's damage will be out-healed by a Blood Fury, especially if the combat masteries halve our attack speed in melee again, or worst case scenario, you can just go in a small team and absolutely own it. For next, it's only phase 2 where you need to range, and again, you could probably tank it if you needed to, especially if you got the last recall sigil to simply teleport straight back here with some more supplies. So it's pretty melee friendly, and all of the gear between those 2 regions mean all this build is really missing is a ring, ferocious gloves and piety, but as always we can't have them all. Piety is definitely the biggest upgrade of the 3 by far, giving 5% more accuracy and 8% more strength over the next best prayers. But as a downside, that region does have demonic gorillas that requires 2 combat styles and the Kraken that can't be killed with melee. So picking that region means you've got this insane build, but the region itself is only really good for the thermonuclear smoke devil. I'm not convinced about Kourend either, just for the gloves being a good idea, since raids take a long time to get points from, and the gloves only give a +7 strength and +8 accuracy over the region bracelet anyway. Another option you can choose with this setup is Fremennik as your 3rd region with the Berserker ring, but more importantly, the Rapier is good at forecath. The Scythe is best on slot for the Duke, and with the League's relics, you'll easily be able to kill all 3 Dagonoth Kings with melee before they respawn. As an added bonus, Fremennik is also very good for points, and because of that, I'd probably make it my 3rd pick for melee. But it's a very close call, and I wouldn't even hate on someone picking Varlamore instead, with all of the bosses also being weak to melee there. I've seen so many different mage build regions, such a divisive topic with everyone having their own opinion on it, but for a mage build, I think you have to go Kourend, surely. The Shadow, Ancestrals and an Arcane Prayer Scroll is just too good to pass up. Now I am a massive fan of the Shadow in leagues, it absolutely owns 90% plus of bosses, but the Chambers of Zarek itself requires you to have a decent melee and range setup as well. So the way I've gone about this build is to try to make magic very strong whilst trying to have a decent melee and range setup as well. The other issue with Kourend and the Shadow is the other bosses. It sucks at Alchemical Hydra, and you'll only probably have about a 60 to 70% accuracy at Sarachnis, which isn't ideal, but with League's boost we'll probably get to about 80% or so, which you could definitely live with. It is though good against Lisman Shaman at least. The thing with a mage build is if you want the Shadow, you have the same issue in every region. It sucks against Leviathan in the desert, and also the Nightmare in Morytania, but I personally think Kourend is just the best of the 3. I'd also pick Kanderin, which I think is a must for magic. It gives the occult with a 5% damage boost to magic, even after the nerf, as well as the Tormented Bracelet. The Kraken is weak to magic, and so is the Thermonuclear Smoke Devil, leaving just Demonic Gorillas where you need another combat style, but overall the region is very magic friendly. But whilst that is a pretty insane mage build already, with only really missing the cape and the boots, you can't really choose the Wilderness for the cape as we have next to no melee or range gear, and that won't help much at all. Plus Vettian and Venenatis are also very strong to magic. So for the cape slot, I think we just have to settle for one of the RD capes that gives a small magic boost. We could get the Infinity Boots from the desert, but I'd only pick 2 raid regions if you just simply love raiding, and in which case, go for it. But I wouldn't go down that route because we have a bigger problem. We still need some decent melee and range gear for the Chambers of Xeric. So for the boot slots, I think we just have to make do with wizard boots from Clues. I think my third region for magic would probably be Varlamore. Well, I'd actually pick the region first as my first unlock. Most of the content is low level, gives you a complete mid-level mage, range and melee setup, and the new boss is weak to magic as well. Plus, it gives you the Dragon Hunter wand for an alternative before you get the Shadow. Plus, I wouldn't even worry about the Perilous Moon bosses not being weak to magic. If you pick the region first, it's just going to be the place that you level up, and you're probably going to get all your tasks done in the region before you start to unlock your really powerful magic relics anyway. If you plan to go down the range build route, I personally think Tirannwn is a must. It gives you full crystal, the Bofa, as well as the blowpipe from Zul'Ra, literally giving you almost a complete range setup straight away. Range only Zul'Ra will be absolutely fine in leagues if you're choosing all the range combat masteries, plus the Corrupted Gauntlet is so much easier, you hardly need any supplies to kill the bosses and you get all your weapons and gear in there. The next region I'd pick is Asgarnia, where we can get the Pegasians, Avars and Zarite Vams from here that we need, along with full armour and a Zarite crossbow. Plus, all of the God Wars dungeon bosses are fairly weak to range too, so it's a good region for using your build as well. And since that region also gives you a Staff of the Dead and Virtus, plus Bandos, God Swords, Dragon Defender, D-Boots, and we already have a region that gives us the Blade of Seldor, we're pretty much set at this point. But as usual, it's always the tricky third region that's difficult to pick. You could go down the desert route and get a T-Bow and Missouri from the Tombs of Amaska, or even Kourend for the T-Bow, Dex and Brimstone Ring. But if you want to go for points, I never thought I'd say this, but I think this is a great build to ignore all of the raid regions, since those regions can take a very long time to farm the high level point. Since we've already got Crystal, Armour, a Zarite Crossbow and Bofa, which is pretty damn strong, why take on a raid region that requires a melee and a magic build when we have such a great setup and everything that we have to kill so far is pretty weak to range? So I think you have a free hit with this setup to pick a small region if you want to go for points, the Wilderness if you want to get some easy skill and supplies, since the Bofa will own revs until you get the rev weapons. Alternatively, you could also go Fremennik, a nice small region, and again, you'll easily kill all 3 Dagonoth Kings with range once we've got all of the boosts, because they have such a long respawn timer anyway, having 3 combat styles isn't really necessary. Vorkath's also weak to range, and we've got the Blade of Seldor for the Duke. Fremennik also gives us the Archer's Ring, filling the last empty slot that we've got. Another alternative is I'm also seeing a lot of love for Varlamore in the League's Discord this year for range builds. I think that's because you can get mixed hides, the Hunter Crossbow, and a set of everything from the Perilous Moons. But I think I'd lean towards Fremennik personally, especially with Vardorvis being in the Varlamore region this league's. And the main reason being is it's more efficient for points, as smaller areas tend to have more points from each boss, and last time we got 1600 points for simply killing the DKs 300 times each. Speaking of points, if you're going for the most points this league's, I think you have to build it around small areas like Fremennik, Tirannwn, and maybe Varlamore, but of course that is the great unknown currently. Smaller regions just don't have the content, so they give you points for killing the boss so many times, they give you points for what the boss drops you, they give you points for doing the combat achievements for that boss, and it just rarely happens in larger areas, so you tend to get more points from each piece of content. It's also 2 regions where the bosses are pretty simple to do with the gear you get from the region itself. So this is the best in slot gear that you have when you combine Fremennik and Tirannwn together, a very good range build, plus a Blade of Seldor and a face guard for melee, as well as Virtus for the mage build, but no decent mage weapon. Varlamore would fix this for us because again it gives us a mid-level set of absolutely everything, and the Dragon Hunter wand is a decent weapon, not just against dragons. The region though is a little bit of a risk because we've never had it in leagues before, but I think it should work because it doesn't have all of its content yet. However, you won't have the best gear for the Colosseum doing this route, or anything else for that matter, so the method relies on points being similar to previous leagues. The other way you could approach it is to pick efficient regions like the desert, which have a ton of training methods that give additional points. Training fishing normally may give you XP just for catching say 50 or 100 lobsters for example, but Temperos levels you up and gives you points for getting the rare items from it, and then once you have the level for lobsters, you go and catch the amount needed for that task in about 5 minutes, and usually you essentially get over double the points training skills that way than simply just leveling up your skill. And the desert has tons of content like this. The Giant's Foundry for smithing, Mage Training Arena for magic, Pyramid Plunder, the Guardians of the Rift, the Agility Pyramid, and the Sorceress's Garden. I also think Varlamore will be pretty good for this as well. The Agility course gives termites that can be traded in for items with Wormtongue and will likely be a task. All of those mixology rewards will probably be a task too, as well as thieving from houses and hunter rumours. As an added bonus, those two regions give you a good melee, range and magic setup as well. You can then simply add in a small efficient region like Fremennik or Tirannwn, or if you plan to spec into one particular combat style, an area that has bosses in it which are weak to that specific combat style. So as we stand, whilst Fremennik is probably the best from what we know so far, the combat masteries and echo bosses could completely change that, so depending on those once we find out about them, I think that could completely change your third region pick here. So hopefully we'll know at least a week before League starts so we can start to plan that. The overall build, and disclaimer, there's so many ways to go about this build, it's probably the most controversial of all of them, because realistically you can do any raid this time and you get Scythe, Tevo and Shadow just to start off with, which are all amazing. Now there's a good reason to pick each different raid area, so I just want to go through what the pros are of each raid region and what I would pair with it. In my opinion, Kourend and Asgarnia give you the best overall build from just two regions. Kourend gives you the full Ancestrals, the 3 Mega Rares, the Arcane and the Dex Prayer Scrolls, Dragon Claws for any bosses that you can double spec kill and last recall back to, the Elder Maul for ones with high defense, the Dragon Hunter Crossbow, Twisted Buckler and Kodai. Asgarnia then fills the main items missing from this region, giving you Torva, plus full armour, a Zarite crossbow, Avars and Vams for range, plus Prims and Pegasians. Sadly not Eternals though, as we would need access to the desert for those. This is the setup with just those two regions, and that's before we add in the Echo boss items. Without knowing what those items are, I don't think you can pick the third region just yet. But Kanderin has piety and the best jewellery in the game, and Fremennik could fill the ring slot for this combination that's currently missing. On its own, Morytania is probably the most complete region. It has the Scythe, Shadow and Tevo just like the other raids, but Barrows also means you've got a complete set of each armour. It's also one of the few regions where you can unlock it first and start working on your gear straight away, since Barrows can easily be done at mid-level in leagues. It also gives you full Inquisitors too, and a ton of items that you can use before you get your Mega Rares, like the Avernic, Rapier, Staffs from the Nightmare as well as the Sang Staff. Plus the Blood Fury if you choose melee combat relics that increase your attack speed is just crazy OP in leagues. You also have the Araxer items, although by the time you get 92 Slayer, you're probably not going to need them. I think the beauty of this region is that of all of the raid regions, it allows you to be far more flexible in what other regions you want to pick, and therefore allows you to have a lot more flexibility in your strategy, where you can choose your next regions for points or simply the areas that you just love, since you already have good enough gear to do pretty much whatever you want anyway. The downside though is it has less best in slot items. The desert's got your Missouri and Kourend has the Prayer Scrolls as well as Ancestrals. Now purely from a gear progression point of view, you could pair this up with Asgarnia for armour, Virtus and Torva, plus the region gives you an Avars and boots from Cerberus. However, that kinda defeats the purpose of picking Morytania in the first place. So picking Tirannwn instead will give you full crystal and a Bofa as an alternative to the desert or Asgarnia for a range build, and then for magic gear you can simply pick any region with a Desert Treasure 2 boss in it and you will have 3 very good setups. Barrows and Varlamore are very similar to me, so I'll probably go for Fremennik as the Desert Treasure 2 boss option, and it also fills the ring slot as well. But again, I mean you can pick whatever you want with Morytania, so if you want to smash the hell out of the wilderness bosses for a ton of supplies, then that absolutely works as well. Picking the desert as your raid region has a few advantages. It's generally the best for points out of the 3, since it has so many skill and methods that give you a ton of points at the same time whilst you're leveling up. It also has the best range armor in the game and a light bearer, with the ring slot being one of the hardest to fill. Leviathan being here also gives you the second best in slot mage gear, and when you add in Asgarnia, you get Torva, all 3 boots from Cerberus, Avars, Zarite, Vams and so on, and that is already looking like 3 absolutely amazing builds, and your third region I think just depends on you. If you want to spec mainly into melee, Kanderin and Piety look very tempting. If you're not the best at combat and you want to pick Varlamore to get a nice easy set of each combat style from Perilous Moons and make life a little bit easier, you can do. If you absolutely hate skilling, you can pick the Wilderness and get all the skill and supplies that you need without having to farm them. Or if you want to utilise the fact that you've got the best range gear, you could pick range combat masteries, go Tirannwn and get full crystal, a bowfer and a blowpipe as well. I honestly don't think there's a wrong third pick with those two areas since you got most of your gear anyway, and then it's just more of a personal choice.